Executive Director of Table to Table. And I've been in that role for about 5 years. And as you know, Table to Table is a food rescue organization, which means that we both feed people facing food insecurity and address issues of waste, food waste, which is a huge contributor to climate change. And so go ahead, Jane, you want to kick us off with your intro?
Sure. Thanks, Nikki. Hi, everybody. I'm Jane Welch. I'm the City of Iowa City Recycling Coordinator, and I work for the Resource Management Division, which handles all of the municipal waste recycling composting programs. And my role within the division is to help maintain those recycling and composting programs, along with a great team of people out at the landfill and throughout our division. I also manage the outreach and education and a lot of the public facing. So just like what we're doing here today with talks and presentations. And then of course, always looking for new markets and opportunities for materials or waste reduction strategies as well. I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Jane. Well, I'm a colleague of Jane's. My name is Sarah Gardner. Hello, everyone. I work also for the City of Iowa City. I am the coordinator for our Climate Action Division. And we do many different things across the city. We take a look at operations within the city in our own facilities and think about how we can be moving toward our climate action goals of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. So we do things like facility improvements. Oh, there's terrible noise in my background. I'm going to start it off with apologizing. We also do a lot of things out in the community. Probably most of our work, in fact, actually is more community focused, because one of the things we know from our greenhouse gas emission inventories that we do each year is that only about 95%, only 95% of our emissions happen outside of City Hall, outside of things that we can directly influence. So we recognize our residents and our businesses here in the city, and nonprofits in particular, as important partners in helping us achieve those net zero goals. And that being said, of course, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to hand it over to Ezra.
Hey, I'm Ezra. I'm at Table to Table as well. I'm our program coordinator. So I generally deal with like the day-to-day route logistics. So like picking up the food and then distributing it to where it should be. And it's kind of the day-to-day operations on our end. Yeah, I mean, and I was also a climate ambassador, which is like through the City of Iowa City. It was a cool community focused like engagement opportunity where I took a couple 8-week class or something like that. And led by Sarah, they brought in lots of speakers to talk about like the Iowa City climate plan in general and what like citizens can do and how they can be involved. So if you haven't become a climate ambassador yet, I would really recommend it. It was a good program, and like talked to a lot of new people and shared a lot. So it's really nice. So, but happy to be here. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Ezra. Well, we have some questions for our panelists today, but also just in recognition of the fact that we have such a nice, cozy group today, I would encourage you to speak up if you have questions about something somebody said, or you want to pop it in the chat. And we'll, again, think about that question that Ellie brought up. You know, what are you facing? What challenges are you facing? Maybe the folks on the panel today have some suggestions, or it gives us information of things to think about and work on ourselves. So I guess, do you want, let's see, I think that we already answered question 2. Do you guys feel like you did that in your intro, or do you want me to go through it again? Which is what the work your organization is doing. Thoughts? Good? Okay, great. All right, Jane, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about what the biggest issues you're seeing around climate change in our community are?
Sure. And this will definitely be through the lens of waste, recycling, materials, that type of thing. I know Sarah will also provide some really great overall climate action perspective there as well. But a few things that we're noticing. So number one, overconsumption is always something that we're concerned with. This is not something that's Iowa City specific. It's something that we see across the United States, across the world. And really what I mean by that is we're buying more than what we need. And one of the best examples we have of this is with food waste, something that I know is close to a lot of our hearts on this call. And if we look at what that impact is on a local level, especially from the landfill perspective, about 25% of everything going into our Iowa City landfill is food waste, which is a lot of food. So there's two reasons we're really, really concerned about that. Number one, of course, all the wasted resources associated with that. But the other aspect is local emissions. So especially when we're talking about climate, food waste is organic. Anytime we put anything organic in the landfill, it produces methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas that then we have to deal with out at the landfill. So food waste is something that we are always really concerned about, always trying to come up with solutions on. And again, a big piece of that overconsumption. Two other just really quick notes on issues, challenges, etc. Another thing, especially since a lot of the programs that we manage within resource management, curbside collection or drop-off recycling, the landfill, hazardous material, etc. Being that Iowa City is a university town, that definitely does create some challenges in terms of education and engagement. Right when we think we've got, the new population engaged and educated, all of a sudden there's more students coming in that need to relearn or, familiarize themselves with what programs we have. So that's something that we're always working towards. How do we make this an easier kind of introduction to what Iowa City is all about? And then the third big piece that I want to share too, and this is definitely within the realm of recycling. So a few different kind of complications related to the topic of recycling. Number one, people love to recycle, which is great. I think it's a topic that Sarah and I, we laugh about this a lot, actually, how much, the topic of climate change and climate action comes up and it goes immediately to recycling, which is an important piece of the puzzle. But again, getting back to what I was talking about with consumption, it does not address overconsumption. It does not target behavior change. Instead, it's what do I do with this when I'm done with it? So that is especially, we're trying to create a lot more waste reduction mentality and mindfulness than just how do I get rid of this? So that's piece number one. The two other things that I want to mention with that too are recycling's location specific. So even 5 miles down the road in West Branch, it's a different program. And secondly, recycling programs can change. They're not permanent. So those two pieces of it being very localized and not being permanent make it so there can be a lot of confusion on how to participate correctly in the program. So I'll leave it there. Sarah, do you have anything else to add to, I know we talk about this a lot, what I just said. So anything else to add to that?
No, I can piggyback on it though and talk a little about, what we see are the biggest issues around climate change in the local community. I think you teed it up so well, Jane, talking about how everybody loves recycling. We do too. One of the reasons Jane mentioned that she and I often, work together and can laugh about some of these things is that Jane formally had my job in the city she came from, and I had Jane's job in the city I came from. So there's a lot of shared knowledge there, I'd say. So when it comes to our office and thinking about climate action, one of the things we do, one of the biggest things is say recycling is good and great, but waste only accounts for about 3% of our total emissions here in the city of Iowa City, right? Now, those emissions, I always put a nice asterisk on this because as Jane mentioned, those emissions are methane emissions as opposed to carbon dioxide emissions. And so they are potent and problematic, and we do want to be addressing them. But if we really are thinking big picture about what we need to do to achieve our climate action goals, a much larger source of emissions, about 75% of all emissions in Iowa City come from our buildings. And that often surprises people because we don't think of buildings as a major source of pollution or emissions, for example. And what we really mean by that when we say buildings is how are we powering the energy that's used in those buildings, the things that turn on the lights, run the cameras on our computers so that we can see each other for this conversation, heat and cool the spaces that we live and work in. All of those things have an energy profile that is attached to emissions. Now, we've been really fortunate here in Iowa City. We've had a great partnership with Mid-American as they've been transitioning toward wind energy that has enabled us to draw our emissions down pretty significantly. In fact, if you haven't heard, when we talk about our goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, we actually had another goal, which was just to try to get it down 45% by 2030. And now we're able to shift the conversation and look to 2050 because we actually achieved that goal of getting our emissions down 45% 10 years early, which we're really excited about. We have almost cut our emissions in half since 2010. We're down about 49% as of our last greenhouse gas emission inventory, which is great news. But as we all know, getting something started is often the easier part than carrying it through to the end, right? So what can we be doing to move climate action forward here in the city? Well, it's a lot of things like increasing energy efficiency, making sure that we're using less energy overall. That not only helps in terms of our clean energy goals, but it also helps us transition to clean energy in a more affordable way. Because if you're only using, let's say, I try to avoid, numbers as much as I can in these presentations because you can see people's eyes glazing over. But let's just say, for argument's sake, as a city, we use, let's say, 100 megawatts of power each year, right? And so we need to build the equivalent amount of clean energy production for that in wind turbines and solar energy. Well, if we can get our energy usage down to 50 megawatts of energy usage each year, that's a lot less turbines and solar panels you have to build, which ultimately translates into lower cost for energy for our ratepayers, which is residents and businesses here in the city. So a lot of what we do in our office is talk about ways that we can help work together with businesses and nonprofits and residents to bring their energy usage down. And then we start talking about transportation as well, and making good use of the clean energy that we have. So one of the other big climate fighting tools we know that we have is to just electrify as many things as we can because we're getting cleaner and cleaner electricity. And a big chunk of that is talking about a shift toward electric vehicles. So some of you may have heard that we recently launched a rebate program that was focused on helping get EV charging in at rental units, so apartment buildings and condos. And we did that because we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to benefit from this clean technology, not just the city, benefiting from those emissions going down, but electric vehicles have a host of benefits for the owners, including drastically reduced fuel and maintenance costs over the lifetime of the vehicle. So we want to make sure that even residents who are living in rental units have the opportunity to charge their vehicles where they live, the same way homeowners do. And we have our eye on the horizon toward creating a similar program for businesses and nonprofits, which is why I wanted to bring it up in this conversation to talk about, like, as for example, Table to Table starts thinking about what kinds of vehicles it's using and could they be electrified. We want to be part of that conversation and help provide support along the way. So we have a climate action plan. It contains 64 items of things we need to do. I have talked about 2 of them. I feel like that's plenty. I'll just turn it over and say, Ezra, is there anything else that you would want to add? I know you're doing things very different from us.
Yeah, no, I think, Jane covered the waste end and Sarah covered a little bit extra. And yeah, Table to Table, we mainly work in like the food waste space. So diverting waste either from grocery stores or restaurants, or sometimes like a farm or a garden. But the opportunity and like challenge I see like in our community right now is just kind of like a base understanding of what like climate change looks like and how it like, is impacting people like now, and it will impact people in the future. And like understanding like the ways that like individuals, but also companies and organizations can do climate action and what that looks like. So just raising that base understanding is definitely a challenge. Like, and this happens like in my daily life, like recycling at home, usually pretty good at it. But I'll catch my partner like putting something in, like, like that's wish recycling, that's actually like, we think it's recyclable, but it's really not. So I'll pull that out and try to use that as like a reminder moment. When I go back to my parents' house, like same situation, and just having those like daily conversations, like kind of on a person to person level, are really like impactful. So yeah, I think that's the only thing I'd add on my end. So
Would you call that Ezra wish recycling?
yeah, I think that that's what the words, like when you wish it's going to be recycled, but really it just causes more problems down the line. So don't do that. Right, Jane?
That is a real term, Nikki. It's either wishful recycling or wish cycling.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which can mean you've made other things in that recycling bin unrecyclable, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow, there's a lot going on. Jane, I appreciated your words on the food waste thing. As we know, it's like one of the third biggest contributors to climate change. And we, Ezra, you mentioned Table to Table does it on a community, business basis, but there's a lot of food waste on the household level too. So, so there's more work to do there. Well, let's see. Any comments like from the crowd here about these items and questions before we move on to our next question?
I would
A little question
from the village community, and I guess it's maybe a comment or just I'm just thinking about different things that have been said, and that idea of wish cycling, and then tying that into that idea that different communities have different recycling programs, I think is really challenging. And I'm having a hard time with that because, like, for example, I live in rural Johnson County, and we use Johnson County refuse. And we have a commingled bin, and we can do glass and, all of this thing. We use Johnson County refuse at the village, but we can't do glass. And then, sometimes there's misinformation, or not misinformation, but misunderstandings about the information on, do things need to be rinsed or do things not need to be rinsed? Does the label need to be removed? Does the label not need to be removed? And keeping that straight between where I'm at and who can do what is really challenging. And as I'm saying this out loud, I'm thinking I need to make little visuals for each place that I'm at to put the recycling bins to say, here is what I can recycle here. And then I was just even thinking from that, I could say, or put it in this box and I will take it home. If it's something that can't be recycled here at the village, but is perhaps something that I can put in my own recycling bin at home. So I think that is confusing. And I see some people err on the side of, I'm going to throw everything in there just in case. And other people err on the side of just throwing it away because I can't keep track of what can be recycled where. So I can appreciate that on a larger scale that you guys are dealing with.
And that is a good, that's good like context for what the actual experience is for folks. And I think, something that we were talking about the other day also, in terms of nonprofits and the folks we serve and how everybody in our community, I mean, Sarah, I didn't know that we had EV stations at condos and apartments. Those are places that are rented. Those are not places typically of homeowners. And when I think about in terms of social services, it can also be a challenge, like recycling and managing food waste and composting. It takes time. And that's often, it's in short supply for everyone, but especially for folks that have to, where things are already challenging. So that's something, when I think about the broader picture, is reaching all of those people. And that's something nonprofits, I think, can have an eye toward. I'm going to read questions on the side here, but go ahead. Who was going to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that for Anne. So you are absolutely right. I think this also, I have a lot of empathy for that response because it is complicated if we think of manufacturing, the, innovative new products that are coming out, the absolute diversity of packaging, the mislabeling of packaging. And I think what ends up happening, and this is not just Iowa City, this is everywhere, right? Manufacturers, unfortunately, do not have required guidelines right now on what they can slap on a package in terms of guidance of, can it be recycled or composted, or what it's even made of to begin with. And so what we typically see on a municipal or county level is that burden really gets to the local landfill or the local programs, trying to figure out how do we deal with this in the most sustainable way and keeping up with all the new products that are coming out. Two examples that I'll share are flushable wipes and some toothpaste tubes that are now saying they're recyclable. Flushable wipes are not flushable, and toothpaste tubes are not recyclable. Things like that, where we're constantly trying to keep up. And so it's a weird way to look at this, but really recycling programs are trying to have the guidelines be as simple as possible in a really complicated consumerism landscape. So please know we're trying all the time to make it seem as simple as possible, even though packaging continues to be really complicated. Yeah.
Would the best advice be to err on the, I mean, where would you err? On the side of not recycling something that
Correct.
potentially is? Okay.
Yes, if you are not sure, and that's really where the line comes in, when in doubt, throw it out.
Okay.
If you are not sure, don't put it in the recycling bin. And we'll talk about this a little bit too on one of our future questions on how residents can engage, but I really cannot emphasize it enough. Always check your local program in terms of what the local guidelines are, because Coralville, West Branch, you know, they're different than Iowa City. So it really just depends where you live. Yeah.
I'll say I just threw a link in the chat to a conversation Jane and I hosted on exactly this topic that talks about how recycling gets sorted and why wishful recycling actually works against a healthy recycling program. So it's a great resource to check out to get more information.
Sarah. And you asked a question in the chat that I think will partially be answered here in this next question, and then we'll follow up because I actually want to know more about the green tag program. So our next question is, what is one thing your organization is doing around climate action that you're really proud of? And Sarah's going to kick us off on this one.
Yeah, you know, and actually this speaks to another comment that's in the chat box. I started out talking about all the things that we're doing to try to bring emissions down, which is known as mitigation in the climate action field. But the other half of climate action actually is climate preparedness. And this can be a little tough for us to talk about because, you know, of course, we all want to avert the worst outcomes of climate change. And that is still possible through bringing our emissions down. But because of the way the climate works, you know, it's sort of a slow changing system in some ways. There are some effects of climate change that are already baked in and will be with us for a while. And these include things like heavier and more frequent rainstorms, higher summer temperatures, actually higher nighttime temperatures, which doesn't get talked about as much, but has some real human health implications. And so the other half of what our office does is really try to think ahead to not even all that far ahead. I mean, we all have seen these impacts already, right? Think, what are the impacts that we're dealing with now and in the future? Who is vulnerable in our community, and what can we be doing to make sure that we're protecting the vulnerable among us as we think about these impacts? So I'll say one thing that I'm just so excited about is a program we're getting ready to launch this summer as a pilot program, and we're calling it the Teen Resilience Corps. And it's aimed at exactly this, fostering these kinds of conversations where we're identifying vulnerabilities and really working with neighborhoods to come up with climate solutions that work for them. So we've been partnering with a number of nonprofits here in Iowa City as we develop this program, including United Action for Youth and Public Space One. Although it's not a nonprofit, I often think of it in the same bucket, the Iowa City Public Library. And what we're going to be doing for this program is recruiting a number of teens. There are going to be 5 teens to start with, who are going to come to the library and receive some special training in climate impacts, so knowing what the impacts are for our area. But also there'll be a storytelling component of it where they talk about people in their lives who are resilient, and from this develop their own definition of what it means to be resilient, so that we're not telling them, you know, this is what you need to do to be climate prepared. So that they're saying, like, these are people in our lives who are able to adapt to these kinds of changes. These are the qualities they have. How could we have that as a neighborhood or a city? And then we're asking them, we're going to provide them with training and a mentor to go out in a 2-block area in their own neighborhood, to go door to door and just talk to their neighbors about what are the impacts you're seeing. You know, if it gets hotter in Iowa City over the summers, is that going to make it harder for you to keep your house cool, or do you have a pretty good air conditioning system already? How about water? Are you seeing water in your basement? Like, how do these things impact where you work? And then the teens are going to come back together and they're going to do a couple things. They're going to develop a zine based on their definition of resilience and some of the things they've learned through the training. And they're going to help us pack some home preparedness kits to get ready for some of these climate impacts. And then they're going to take it back out into the community and deliver these kits to the neighbors they talked with. And the kits are also going to be available on the bookmobile. So they're having a direct impact in their neighborhood. And they're also going to be having a broader impact in the community, helping us, you know, get the word out about these coming impacts. So we think it's a really cool program. We're so excited about the nonprofits that we're working with. We like that there's an element of creativity to it as well as education. And we're really hoping that after a successful launch, we will be able to expand this program and work with other nonprofits to see if we couldn't replicate it or tweak it a little to help work with clients that you may be serving. So I would say stay tuned on this program. We think it's an exciting new offering from the office.
Ezra, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah. Like on the baseline, I think what we're really proud of is that we have like a really engaged volunteer base. And whether that's just talking about the regular volunteer routes that they're doing or other like work they're doing like with Table to Table, that I think a lot of our volunteers feel like really valuable and like look forward to volunteering every week. But that also, like, those conversations go beyond just like, oh, what type of food did you pick up today? But you know, it's not rare to have conversations about like climate and climate change and like what we're doing in a personal life and what we're doing at Table to Table and how that impacts it. So the general feel about Table to Table seems to be a place that is open and has like lots of communication about, or like tries to have lots of communication about these issues. But we are also like and you had mentioned something in the chat about you know, does Table to Table track our numbers on carbon dioxide and what we're saving from the landfill. Those, like, I'm not sure exactly where we landed on the percent on the call last week, but it's sizable, but also like the size of like the landfill is also like immense. So it's hard to quite exactly paint a good picture. But Table to Table is doing good work and like diverting about like we pick up and distribute like over 2 million pounds of food, or 2.5 million pounds of food a year. And most likely that would have been sent to the landfill if it wasn't being picked up by Table to Table and then being distributed to people for those people to eat and have like serve and have meals with. So 2 million pounds, 2.5 million pounds of food not in the landfill is really important. And how that translates to like cars driven is kind of tough to paint exactly. Nikki, I don't know if you.
So a few years ago, we had a graduate class do that study, right? So I to answer your question, and yeah, we have done that. What the emissions are, and it's, I don't know, 17,400 pounds of coal burned is what's you know, the emissions that we save. But I think Charlotte, you brought up a good point, you know, and I hope we can talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes. But Ezra, you mentioned, you know, we have great engagement with volunteers about these issues. And we have great volunteers like Charlotte, who's on the call, who are already engaged. And she asked, you know, well, how do you reach people who don't already know about this stuff? And I would love to talk about that a little bit more at Table to Table, actually, because we feed people and it's we do this environmental work. We actually have folks coming to us who aren't doing it for the environmental reason. And so that is a whole audience that we can reach, and they don't know. And those are great conversations that we can have.
I might add something to Charlotte's note, and kind of throw it back to Jane and Sarah. But I think like the electric buses are like a great example of something that is like kind of for everyone, and is not like a preaching to the choir thing, because like I drove into work today, but I was right next to one of the buses that said like I'm electric, and like I think that's like a subtle way to show like, hey, look, like the city has a lot of options for transportation. One of them is an electric bus, and like I can take that bus if it's on my route, and like that's exciting. And like if people are taking the bus either way, and it happens to be electric, like that's awesome, and like that's like a climate action that kind of gets their foot in the door. But Jane, Sarah, you might have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an accessibility piece, Ezra. That's great. Sarah, do you have anything else to add on the electric buses? My note for this question is on a completely different topic. So,
Well, I'll let you take us in that completely different direction, Jane, and then I can circle back on the communications, I think, when we talk on the next project or next question, actually.
great. Okay. I would just say, so something that we're really proud of, and I'm sure all of us can probably empathize with this over the last 2 years that we've had, just moving forward and persevering and adapting programs to attempt sustainability and climate action and other goals to be successful during a very unique time that we've been living in. One of the examples that I'll share with that is related to mattress recycling. So this is something that has been a community discussion for a long, long time. And finally, in 2019, we wrote a grant, we received the funding to do a pilot partnership with Willis Beatty Homeless Services in Cedar Rapids, in which we were going to launch a pilot program for mattress recycling and also offer a employment opportunity at the same time. So some waste diversion, employment opportunity, there were lots of benefits to this program. And we got the funding in 2019, 2020 rolled around. We had some pandemic delays due to that. We moved through those. We were about ready to send our first shipment of mattresses up to them to start this process. And then August 2020 happened. And the building in which we were going to be using for that program, the entire second floor was blown off during the derecho. So we lost our building all of a sudden. We'd already had some of the pandemic delays, and it halted for a good year or so. But I'm really proud to say we're having that conversation again. We did a mattress recycling tour back in November, December time up at a facility in Wisconsin. And now we're in conversations again with Willis Beatty about how can we make this work now, and with the space that they've adapted to, and again with some of the challenges that we're still dealing with the pandemic. So again, a shout out to everyone on this call. I'm proud of everyone on this call for the perseverance and adaptation that we've shown in the last few years. Yeah.
Unmute myself. Before I move on to our next question, which is about just kind of nonprofits and what they're doing and what opportunities there are. And I don't know if you're on or if you're able to speak a little bit to, you asked about the drawdown, and maybe I was just giving some audience, some time for audience input about the green tag program in Decorah and how that might relate to what we're doing.
So up in Decorah, that was the first energy district that now there's like 12 of them, but Winneshiek Energy District was the first. And so they've been able to quantify very reliably their emissions drawdown based off of the programs that they run. And then they can sell these window tags as like a carbon offset, which also ends up being kind of a flywheel to then, purchase more materials, do more programs. And then I was wondering if Table to Table has ever considered anything like that.
We haven't. Jane, Sarah, do you know of anybody locally who is also doing something like that? All right,
Can't
sounds
think of
like an
anything.
opportunity for further discussion. And I think we'll reach out to you after the call, but I appreciate you giving us that summary. I didn't want to move on without addressing that and getting some
Sure.
feedback.
I can put you in touch with some people up in Decorah as well, if you like.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, so our next question is, from panelist perspective, what are some things that you see that maybe nonprofits could do more of in helping move the needle on climate action? What are the opportunities available to us? Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think nonprofits are really uniquely positioned as trusted community partners to be helping get the message out. This may come as a surprise to hear, but not everybody likes the government, even local government. And so there can be some resistance when we go and try to deliver really well-meaning, messaging that's like, hey, we have this money that can help you achieve some energy reductions, or we can help you save money on your energy goals, or we'd love to talk to you about climate preparedness. Like, some folks just don't want to hear it from the government, and that's fine. I think the earlier question we were talking about increase in communications, an important tool is just meeting people where they are. And so I know in the Climate Action Office, we think a lot about ways that we can be engaging with nonprofits where our missions align. Because of course, we never want to come to a nonprofit and take over your mission and be like, hey, table is a table. It's great that you're talking about food diversion, but we'd really love it if you could start talking to folks about insulation now instead. Like, we would not do that, right? But we do see alignment between the food waste reduction that Table to Table does and the kinds of emissions reductions work that we want to do. And so we're always looking for ways that we can partner on that. In fact, I'll leave it to Jane to talk, maybe if we have a little time at the end, about a little pilot program that we're looking to do with Table to Table later this year, which I know we're very excited about. But the other thing that I think nonprofits can do, especially when we talk about something like the Teen Resilience Corps, I had mentioned in my earlier response that, should this prove successful, which we very much hope it will be, we have an idea about going to other nonprofits and saying, hey, could we work with you to sponsor a resilience team to go out and talk in their neighborhoods? Could we replicate this training? Maybe not just with teens, maybe with other people you serve. Is there a way we could piggyback on some of your messaging and get some alignment there? I think things like that we're very much interested in. And I should mention before the conversation's over, one of the other things our office does is offer climate action grants on a yearly basis. And we've noticed that we've had a number of nonprofits applying in recent years to those grants, which is great. We're happy to help fund some of the great projects that nonprofits are pursuing. In particular, we've been thinking a lot about the applications we've been getting for nonprofits who want to put solar panels on top of their buildings, and partly to increase their own resilience, in the case of power outages. And so we've been having a lot of discussions internally about, like, how can we build on that? Like, how could we design a program where we say, sure, absolutely, we would love to help you with some of the upfront costs of putting a solar panel on your roof. Do you think in return you might be willing to host some resilience activities to help build some resilience capacity for the clients you're serving, so that we can be working hand in hand that way? I guess I feel like I've been rambling a bit, but the biggest thing I just want to say is, like, we so much admire the work that nonprofits are doing in the community, and whether or not it's been called climate adaptation or climate resilience, a lot of the work you're doing actually is very much in that spirit of creating resilience in the community, helping address vulnerabilities. And I think we're just very interested in being a partner in that process. Jane, I guess I will toss the question to you. What do you think nonprofits could be doing?
Well, I'll emphasize that too, what Sarah just said. Whether you are a nonprofit that has a clear-cut environmental mission statement or not, I guarantee everything you guys are doing is sustainability work, social, economic, environmental, helping people and planet, all of that is sustainability. So, we're all absolutely part of the equation and the solution there. I think I'll just add to what Sarah said in that, anytime there's an opportunity for a partnership, let's partner. And I really mean that for municipal employees, for nonprofit employees. A lot of times we do have similar goals, so let's support each other. And the example I'll give with that is actually the program that Sarah was mentioning, our partnership with Table to Table. We've got a program launching later this month called Love Food, Fight Waste. And it all started because a Table to Table employee reached out to me and said, Jane, is this it? You know, are there no options for easier composting and food waste diversion in our community for groups that are already trying to divert food waste? And it was an excellent question, you know, and I said, no, I think we do need to do better. So that's really where this partnership came about. And what it's going to be is not only a pilot in which we're looking at a piece of equipment that dramatically reduces the volume of food waste, handling food waste in an environmentally friendly way, but also feasible with a compost facility that is currently at capacity. With an entity like Table to Table that is already trying to save food as much as they possibly can, but sometimes there's items that still get wasted. It's the reality of it. So coming up with a solution for those items as part of this partnership. And then the other piece of this, which is really exciting from a community perspective, is we're doing a food waste reduction education campaign. So we're trying something from sort of a pilot technology standpoint to see if this is a good solution for our community and testing out a really controlled sort of drop-off option for food waste, but also looking at how can we reduce it at the source and offer resources to our community. So perfect example of, you know, let's partner if we've got similar goals. And I'm sure there's a ton of other examples with other nonprofits in the community where there could be, and there already are, some partnerships with nonprofit and nonprofit or municipal in there. But yeah, please reach out if there are ideas or suggestions. You know, we are always happy to have those conversations.
Thank you, Jane. Ezra, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I just like kind of highlight what Sarah was saying and Jane was saying about like kind of doing things and then kind of recognizing them as like climate action and while you're doing it. And I think that's part of that communication part where like someone's doing something and if you say like, hey, you know what, like that is climate action. Like you are like, you know, you are like helping us prepare for like the impacts of climate change. You're helping mitigate the impacts of climate change. Like I think that's like is really valuable for that group or that person. And then they're able to like kind of keep that in their mind as they think about what their next action might be or like what they're doing on a regular basis. So it's like being more flexible in what we think about like what is climate action. Like there's so many nonprofits in like Johnson County that are working in like anything is like probably is sustainable or like you can think about it in a sustainable way. So yeah, I think that's just fun. And also thinking of like ways to engage with like the climate space that might not be like, you know, planting a tree or like, you know, recycling, things like that, but just like reading a book and having like conversations with your neighbors. You know, I read a book last week that was, you know, like a fiction book about like the climate future and talked to my neighbors about it. And like, she checked out from the library too. So I think that small interaction and like nonprofits can do similar things. Like we can have, you know, book clubs or we can have like monthly conversations like this or things like that are still tied in some way and just get the gears rolling and moving. That's all I had. So thanks.
Those are great examples, Ezra. This is why you're a climate ambassador. Something that I think about is that I'm like so proud of the Hunger Relief Network for is normalizing we have this sense of food dating stuff and like what you can eat, what you can't, and all of that. And when you're recovering food to then give to folks who don't have enough to eat, there can be a message sent there if you believe collectively as a community that like that's garbage food because it's past its date. That's sending a message to the people you're serving too, right? Like we don't, you know, that there's a lack of value there. So one thing I really appreciate in Johnson County is that I'm looking at the faces of multiple people on this call who know you can eat food past its date and will do that because you understand how that works. We have to set the example and standard, and our nonprofit staff and volunteers do that and help communicate that so that when food that is at its date is passed out to folks, that's normal. We would eat it, you can eat it. And that's also, we talked about some of the barriers or that there are barriers for folks, low income folks, to engaging in climate action. And Ezra, your point of calling it out when people are doing it, eating that food, that it was heading, to the trash for no reason is 100% climate action. And we need to recognize the folks that are taking that food. 2.5 million pounds, think about it. That goes to the landfill. People are still hungry. Now you have to buy 2.5 million more pounds of food. That doesn't make sense. And I just love how the nonprofits in Johnson County are really on board with that messaging and live those values as well, to the extent that sometimes we get stuff that doesn't meet we hand distributed it wasn't labeled properly or something. And the volunteers, they'll put it on the table and they'll eat it. And that is demonstrating that it's good, and we all have the ability to do that. So I'm not a panelist, but I just wanted to shout out for folks who help us do that work. And our last question is about, and this is the one I think we've gotten a few questions in the sidebar about, how can individuals engage in climate action work? And Jane, get us started.
Yeah, we've already talked about this a little bit, but I did put a web link in the chat box for everybody. So, I mentioned recycling, waste reduction programs. They can change. They're very location based. So for those of you that are located in Johnson County, this is really your resource. So what we've got at this webpage is a quick navigation section, because I'm sure if anyone has tried to navigate the city website, it is not always user friendly, hence why we're getting a new website. But in the meantime, to make it easier, we do have this quick navigation section. So anything and everything you would need to know about waste, composting, recycling, waste reduction programs, you can find in this one section. It just makes it a lot easier to find those resources and handouts and subpages and all that. So I would recommend checking that out. And again, this is for individuals, residents of Johnson County, but really we do have a lot of programs too that are available to nonprofits, available to businesses. So, check out those resources. If there are any questions, like I said, I'm happy to have those conversations and clear up any confusions there may be. And then, Ezra.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think if you want to engage with table work, or you have friends who might be interested, just come by and you can start volunteering. I think some of the most as we were just saying, anything could be climate action, but perhaps the most feeling of climate action is our gleaning program, which is throughout the summer and throughout the harvest season, where we have groups of volunteers go to local farms to harvest the produce that the farm either has too much of or for some reason couldn't sell, and they go out there and pick the tomatoes and the peppers and the squash, things like that. It's a good get your hands dirty and feel the earth, and I think our gleaning volunteers really enjoy the summer, just that engagement with that. But also just come by and volunteer. We have so many different volunteer opportunities. So we can get you connected. So
you sold me. The farms are beautiful, I will tell you.
Yes.
Mechanicsville, there's one, and Scattergood Farms, but also locally out at Grow, Johnson County. So we hope to see you. Sarah, do you have anything to add on the individual engagement?
Yeah, so many things. I would not be doing my job if I didn't mention that a week and a half from now, we're going to be conducting our annual neighborhood energy blitz, where we work with volunteers to go door to door to drop off energy saving kits. This year it's going to be in Lucas Farms. And it's actually not too late to sign up if you or people would like to participate in that. It's a great hands-on activity that actually does result in measurable emissions reductions, which is great. Of course, that's short notice, so we understand if you can't make it. But I'll also add that Ezra, at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about how he went through our Climate Ambassador program. That's another great way to learn more about climate action at the city level. It is an 8-week training course that takes a deep dive looking at the climate action plan, and it's 5 different sections, and identifying what the city is doing and also what we as individuals can do. And actually, a really important part of that training is that we provide training on effective climate communication. So exactly the question that came up in this discussion, like how do we talk about this effectively? We actually have a little guide that we use early on that looks at 13 points of effective communication on this. And then we go back to it as we move through each session and say, you know, what are we seeing at work here in terms of the climate communications, and how could we be embracing more of that in our conversations? And I'll just say, in case you never have a chance to take the course, one of the biggest ones is just, you know, to talk about it personally, like to move. I, in the presentation, talked about how I don't like to go into numbers. That's very deliberate because, you know, the data pretty clearly shows that people aren't as persuaded by numbers as we maybe would hope they would be. What they are persuaded by are hearing from friends and neighbors stories about like, hey, this is what I've been thinking about climate action lately. These are the kinds of things that worry me. These are the kinds of actions I'm taking. It turns out to be pretty easy. You know, I'd love to show you how I'm composting in my backyard, or let me tell you how much I love these LED light bulbs that I put in that are now saving me money. So it's a great takeaway, I think, that anybody can use. And if you want to know more about it in depth, I'll put a link to our Climate Ambassador program in the chat box. So you can keep your eyes out for a future training opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, I feel like we did a pretty good job talking through questions and comments throughout, but at the beginning of the conversation, we did ask you to share with us what kind of challenges your orgs face, and Brownsburger, you did a little bit of that. Does anybody have anything additional to add to that, or want to comment or get some feedback from folks?
This is super specific, but I always question, where can I go to find like guidelines or rules or what it looks like for food waste at an event? I feel like at events, we often have a lot of things left over, but I don't know what I'm allowed to bring to, say, the pantry, or what I'm allowed to call someone about, and what, like, where can I even find those guidelines? Where should I go to look for that?
Good question, Ellie. I would say you're allowed to call us whenever you have a question. Definitely, like, because there's the guidelines, like maybe we could add them to our website. It could be useful, but definitely give us a call, and then either we can take them or we can connect you to someone who might have different guidelines that we're able to accept. Some of ours are a bit stricter than maybe another organization. So is that helpful? Like if you're like having a buffet and like there's some food that hasn't been served yet, but like could go to waste, give us a call and we're able to get that food. But if it has been served, we can't really take it. I would probably suggest you would compost that if you can't find someone else that would take it. Like I was just at a event last week, and they had a bunch of items that were served. So I was like, oh, I can't take these to work, but I just like took them, and then there was like cupcakes, and I walked around to my neighbors and like gave them all cupcakes. So like,
yeah, and you brought donuts for volunteers.
I brought cookies last week. Yeah. So I mean, if you can think outside the box, but always give us a call. So
I guess, Ezra, before you wrap up, I have one more question. What's the book you and your neighbors are reading?
Oh, it's called the Children's Bible.
Okay.
It's like kind of interesting. It's good. It's just quick read. So.
Oh, Ezra, I have read that book. We should talk.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, so many thoughts. That's next month. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. Ellie, do you have anything else to say?
Yes, I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists. So Jane from the City of Iowa City Recycling, Sarah from City of Iowa City Climate Action Network, Ezra Table to Table, and obviously an ambassador. And then Nikki, thank you for moderating also from Table to Table. So thanks for joining us today. We will send out a follow-up email. I've got all these links that have been thrown in the chat that I can send out to you so you don't have to scramble to get those before you hop off. And then wanted to let you know our next kind of ed session will be the second week of May. So we'll be talking about burnout and secondary trauma in nonprofit professionals. So join us for that one. Check out our website and get on our e-newsletter list. Otherwise, hopefully we'll see you in a month. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.